All right, welcome everybody to HOJ-Cast number 20. This week we're getting 2 HOJ-Casts, and that's because I'm quite excited to discuss and go into depth on a trade that I did, easily the biggest trade of my card collecting career from a value point of view. And you only get to do a trade like that every once in a while, if ever. And I've got so many thoughts about it. And it really is symbolic. It represents a risk I'm taking based on my collecting approach, and so yeah, I mean, I'm thrilled to be able to discuss it, but I'm a little bit apprehensive or concerned, worried that the last handful of episodes I've done have discussed very topical things that are applicable to sports card collecting, whether it's philosophy or the industry, in a very widespread way. Anybody can sort of tap in and engage with what I'm saying, have an opinion on what I'm saying. It's sort of topics that relate to all of us on some level. And I'm afraid that the topic of this episode is going to be wildly self-indulgent. And it's really just going to be me explaining a collecting approach, explaining thoughts and ideas behind a trade. And so I'm worried about disappointing the listener, and that in delivering a rather slow or off-topic episode. So no offense taken if this isn't your cup of tea, but if it is, or if it's something you're interested in, then let me give a few more introductory thoughts, because it wouldn't be a HOJ-Cast without a bunch of prologue before we get to the point. So something that I'm thinking about with this particular episode is that is what is its use case? What is the point of me giving an episode that's essentially a journal entry or a diary entry? This is essentially me writing or gathering thoughts about something that I've done, and creating a sort of time capsule, or capturing my sentiments at the time, my reasoning, and granting that in so doing, we're inevitably going to find hypocrisies in my own stated points of view, or, to put it more delicately or more charitably, evolutions in thought that I've had, or maybe to put it more neutrally, changes, developments in the way I approach collecting, and the things that I like and the things that I don't like. And that the bias of ownership and the bias of trading something away and the excitement of the moment and the momentum and all these things are going to color my opinions, and they're going to color them in ways that I'm not going to be able to see particularly well, but a more dispassionate audience member will be able to see them and point them out. And I welcome dialogue. I welcome disagreements. I welcome agree. I don't mind if you agree either, but I welcome it all. And I do credit debates. I do credit passionate debates that I've had with collectors over the last several years, with actually playing a very formative role in me developing and refining my own collecting approaches. And not to say that I'm just I have a debate and then somebody else is right and I'm wrong and I just follow their path, although sometimes that happens. But more so, I'm more so saying that that the challenge that really going toe to toe in the moment and having to think on the fly and defend my positions, and then hear somebody else do the same for theirs, and let it get heated, let it get intense, like go back and forth and really have it out on the intellectual battlefield. That what that does ultimately is it if nothing else, it helps me sharpen my own points of view. It also can cause me to sort of lose sight of other things too, if you get sort of too narrowly stuck into a discussion with just one collector, and you're sort of trying to have them see your side, and then you sort of start tailoring everything you're saying to where they're coming from. You can lose sight of the things that you thought were important that maybe they don't. So it's not all upside, just constantly debating things all the time. Eventually you do have to sort of step back, figure out I have to step back, think about what I think is important, and stay true to it, even if somebody else's values are different, even if they start from a different playing field or from a different position. So I'm as another apprehension I have is that maybe some of the things that follow are already going to contradict or be in tension with points of view or things I've said earlier. I always try to couch my opinions in the language of tentativeness, that what I say or believe or espouse in one particular podcast is subject to change. I mean, one of the funnier examples of that, which never fails, is that it was just a few podcasts ago when I was remarking that I'm not interested in these. These are the 1999 Athlete of the Century Michael Jordan one-of-ones. It's a 90 card base set. Each of the 90 cards has a one-of-one, and I was sort of saying why I'm not interested in these. But then I also said, don't be surprised if you see one of these in my collection. Now, I didn't go out of my way necessarily to get that one. I took it back in a different trade that I'll talk about probably in a few weeks. Also very excited about that trade. So I'll have the opportunity to talk about that later. But just as one example of many of where my hypocrisies may be laid bare, or something I said earlier, I end up contradicting it. It actually takes me back to sort of as a kid. This is going to be a really weird tangent, but I'll keep it short. As a kid, I was terrified of spiders, and then I became fascinated by them, and I would trap them in jars and stuff like that. I mean, let's not go too far down there. I'm terrified of them again as an adult, but it's something psychological that I've noticed about myself, is that something that worries me or concerns me is or scares me, it ultimately becomes something that I take a fascination in. And then maybe there's something psychological there. Maybe there's something in the field of psychology that has noticed that the things that scare us the most also are maybe the objects of our fascination. And it's a bit of a reach to compare that here, but all I'm sort of trying to say is that the like a card like the Athlete of the Century that I would swear off and give reasons, and then I'm negotiating the terms of a trade, and all of a sudden I'm taking it back, and I haven't rushed to list it for sale either. I've held on to it. So I'm worried that the content here isn't really going to be on topic for a lot of people. I'm worried that as I sort of lay bare in real time my collecting approaches as they develop, that I'm going to contradict myself or say silly things or just be swept up in the moment and sort of that it's on display for everybody to notice. But you know what? That's part of what we're doing here. And myself, I'm a person, I certainly learn and get excited through the medium of the exchange of ideas. And sometimes I just like to literally have a one-sided exchange where I just say a bunch of things and then let other people reply. And I do look forward to the replies. Okay, so then there's the final question of what is the use case here, right? Which is what I've been building up to. And I think the use case for an episode like this, if I were a listener, if I weren't me, if I were an audience member, I would approach an episode like this for its entertainment value and for any infectious or inspirational energy that it can provide. So one of the ways that I really like to use podcast listening, I listen to lots of podcasts, I like to use podcast listening as sort of something that is somewhere in between background noise and a lecture in the university setting. I like to just listen to it. I hope that it's things are being said that are teaching me something or causing me to creatively think or challenging something that I believe in. But ultimately, that the point of my listening experience is to provide a springboard for my own thoughts, to provide a jumping off point for me to start having a creative thought that actually I can implement, or that brings me happiness, or that just is somehow intellectually stimulating. And so there will be a tendency, I think, to look at an episode like this and think, because I'm going to present some pretty radical ideas in this episode, and to sort of think like, is this educational? And there will be information, there will be neutral information provided, but I don't. That's not quite what's going on here. If I were an audience member, I wouldn't approach this as an educational foray. I would approach this as entertainment. I would approach this as, here's a guy who's excited. He's probably going to fire off some relatively hot takes. He's excited to talk about his collection. And let's just listen and see if there's any energy that we can take away from this, or if he says something that might spark a thought in my own mind of something I like about my own collection. So a lot of my favorite hobby content is content that that discusses collecting approaches, or that just gives the details of a trade or a purchase, and or talks about how a collection is being built, or that ranks cards, or that argues that this is the best card or that's the best card. I really like content like that, not because I follow it, not because that I'm going to agree or be in lockstep with the speaker, with the host of that particular episode, but not for that reason, but instead because it gives me all of this fuel that I start using to think about my own approaches, and I might end up developing completely different approaches than what the host is providing, but it is the host that gave me the jumping off point. They gave me the launch pad, because when they introduced the general proposition of comparing cards, or why they made a trade, or why they made a purchase, or what they think this card means, what its significance is, or how they approach their collection, and what collecting means to them, and why they do it in this way, that I don't necessarily have to agree with anything that they're saying, but that gives me occasion to think about my own collection, my own collecting approach. And that's how I think content like this episode in particular should work. And that's a little bit different. So in prior episodes, sort of we're engaged, I'm putting out some thoughts on topics that are relevant hobby wide, and then their opinions, and people can do with them what they'd like, engage with them, disregard them, whatever, that's fine. But here, this is less of like a head-to-head engagement of ideas, and this is more of just laying bare something existential. This is laying bare something that goes into the layer of meaning, something that talks about an adventure that I've had, and sort of chronicling the experience. And in that way, it's like I said, I think the distinction is this is more entertainment, or infectious energy, or something that an audience member can use to sort of think about their own collection with, and just to get inspired and go off and just pause this podcast 30 minutes in. Like Brett from Sagging Slabs had a funny comment on one of his more recent Patreon exclusives, where he said he was listening to one of the HOJ-Casts, and he got to like the 30-minute mark, and he just turned it off, and he had to go develop his own thoughts, right? He's like, I've listened to enough. These HOJ-Casts are absurdly long. I've listened to enough. Now I have ideas that I want to go jot down and share. And he did, and they were fantastic ideas. And so that's I think my goal with podcasting is if the audience is listening, taking inspiration, developing their own ideas, going, whether they completely go against me, whether they hate what I'm saying, that's not the point. The point is that if I've provided a spark, or if I've been part of the materials that provided a spark, that got people excited about their own collections, about their own approaches, because that's my reciprocity. That so much hobby content has done that for me. It's that ultimately is the hope of what my hobby content does. That's enough. That's the prelude, a nice 13-minute prelude to this episode. Now let's get to the trade. So I need to get into some background here, and you'll notice that I have displayed on the screen, for those of you watching on YouTube, I have a picture which shows myself holding the card that I received in trade, which is the 1997-98 Upper Deck PowerDeck white jersey 1 of 1. And I'm standing next to the great Stanley. On Instagram, he can be found at Stasic1313, STACIK 1313. He's holding in his hands 2 molten metal fusion titaniums out of 40. He already had one, which is a PSA 6.5. The other one he has is the one that I traded to him, which is a BGS 8.5. And so those were the 2 major pieces in the trade. However, as we'll get into in a little bit, Stanley actually sent me 7 cards in our attempt to get the value equal. So I'm showing the 1 card, but really there were 7 total. But from my point of view, that 1 card I have there, the PowerDeck white jersey variation 1 of 1, the white jersey 1 of 1, that is the jewel, the crown jewel of my haul. So I've got that picture up in there. Now that most of my thoughts here are going to relate to the PowerDeck white jersey 1 of 1. But let's go backwards a little bit here, because there's some background to fill in that's going to ultimately explain why I would give up my molten metal fusion titanium out of 40, which is one of my favorite cards. It's one of the most beautiful Michael Jordan cards ever made. It has just 40 copies. It's got that beautiful gold hue to it. It's very high ranking among almost all collectors of almost all players. I've had it for 6 years. I have very fond memories of the day that Christina and I went to a swap meet in Santa Monica, which was chosen as the neutral location at which we would meet with the collector who we ended up buying that from. And so there's just great memories tied up with that card. It's a valuable card. It's a beautiful card. It's a very, very difficult card to let go. And it survived, I think, for about 6.5 years. It lived in our collection for about 6.5 years. So it had a really nice run. But so I want to sort of explain why I would ever let that card go, and why I would let it go for the card that I took back, or the cards that I took back. So that story starts with the fact that I pretty much paused Michael Jordan collecting around mid 2020. That was the time when Card Ladder was in its infancy, but really starting to be very demanding. That was around the time when Michael Jordan cards started multiplying in price. Again, they had been incrementally ticking up, which we covered on the House of Jordans podcast quite a bit during the 2017, 18, 19, 20 era. But once you really got into 2020, stay at home, in the the summer of 2020 was in the wake of The Last Dance. At that time, it just got pretty cost prohibitive to collect Michael Jordan, and so I paused it. I didn't sell Michael Jordan cards, but I put a pause on collecting it. It just became difficult, and I started looking in other places. Okay, so I had basically a 2 to 3 year hiatus from Michael Jordan collecting that was interrupted by a significant purchase or two. One of those significant purchases being picking up one of the Flair Showcase Legacies and paying the record high for it, which I think is still the all-time high to this day. So it wasn't a total desert of Michael Jordan collecting for me from 2020 to about 2023, but I was heavily focused in other areas, and Jokic and Luka, and eventually Mahomes, Le'Veon Bell, Christian McCaffrey, other stuff. I even had an ill-fated fling with collecting Frank Ntilikina. I recently proposed trading a Frank Ntilikina card to somebody, and they wrote back, I guess I need to Google who Frank Ntilikina is. So that didn't work out so well. But anyway, all right. So the thing that I as I look back in retrospect, the thing I think that got my Michael Jordan collecting appetite whetted again was when Brian of Cajun Cardboard invited me to come on a show with Frankie and Josh Dawson. I'm pretty sure it was all four of us, Frankie, Josh, Brian, and myself, and we would give some input or discuss aspects of his Michael Jordan hierarchy project. And so let me display his hierarchy project on the screen. And so I wanted to bring something novel to that discussion. And I knew for certain that Brian, Frankie, and Josh would have covered in ample depth Michael Jordan's catalog writ large. And so that's sort of the ambition behind the hierarchy project, is that it attempts to provide a sort of checklist and an informational menu of plenty of highly collectible 90s Michael Jordan cards. And the list was assembled through consultation with Michael Jordan collectors, long-standing Jordan collectors. And so he separated it into tiers, and the tiers are not he's not trying to strictly enforce these or anything. He's just sort of trying to reflect the state of the market and the state of sentiment, and sort of just help people figure out, if they're maybe newer to Michael Jordan collecting, perhaps starting in tier 4 is a great place to start. Lots of cool cards in there. It's also the largest tier. The tiers sort of pyramid up with a wide base and then a narrow top. And so you start in tier 4. So that's the practical utility of this, is that when you go through these different tiers, you have you have different sort of entry level. It's different entry points. So to give some examples here, like in tier 4, I see, for example, the 1995 Ultra Gold Medallion, or the 1995 Power Boosters. One of the, I believe there's 3 in that base, so there's one of them. Some of the other cards I see, Skybox Premium Standouts. I see Stadium Club Holding Court. I see Emotion Intense. I see Flare New Heights, Flare Anticipation. These are tier 4 cards. I see some of his cooler base cards are in here. And then if you graduate up to tier 3, now you're looking at the 1997-98 Thrill Seekers insert, 95-96 Natural Born Thrillers, 95-96 Ultra Full Court Trap, Gold Medallion, presumably that's the gold, Silky Smooth, the insert with the net cover on it. You start to see different stuff like that. Then you get up to tier 2, and now we're talking about some really pricey cards. We're talking about 1997-98 Platinum Portraits. We're talking about Classic 61. Where we have the first year of Credentials, which is numbered to 499. We've got Collector's Choice, the version number to 100. We've got the Platinum Medallions, Noise Boys insert, things like that. And then up in tier 1, which is the highest tier, we have the PMG Green, the Red. We have the PMG Championship. We have the 98 PMG, the Molten Metal Fusion Titanium, the Credentials Now and Future from 97, StarQuest Gold, the Golden Boss Refractor, Rubies, Jambalaya, stuff like that. Okay, so this is how the tiers are breaking out. And look, I mean, this is comprehensive. This is awesome. So I outside of just jumping in and sort of chiming in and saying, yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of debate to be had here. Like, should High Voltage 500 be in tier 1 or not? Should the, which is currently in tier 2, should the Flare Showcase Legacies, should those be in tier 1 or should those be moved down? One of the cards that I actually did end up arguing should be moved up a tier were the Stadium Club One of a Kinds, which I believe those ended up belonging to tier 3 maybe, and I think maybe I wanted them to be in tier 2. My eye is just sort of trying to quickly scan to figure out where those might live. But anyway, I thought those maybe were a little bit underrated. That was one of the takes that I was coming in with. But I wanted to really, look, I mean, it's in my nature to challenge and to provoke and to take an unusual angle on something and try to find a unique approach that excites me, that has a little bit higher stakes. And so the thing that actually occurred to me pretty quickly that it happened to me the day of this. So this was a day in around September of 2023. It occurred to me the day of that I want to I want to know why I mean, okay, so Cajun excluded he excluded patch autograph cards. I'm pretty sure he excluded patch and autograph cards, and I think he excluded one of ones as well. And I wanted to know, why are there no one of ones on here? I mean, I understand that they've been excluded, but what, or more specifically, I think my level of interest was why are we excluding the one of ones? And there is good reason. The one of ones are being excluded so that we can create a hierarchy here that for example, has images of all the cards. Like some of the one of ones, they've never even been seen. Like we're talking about ghost cards. And so, we can get images of everything. This is accessible, even tier 1, these cards, maybe with the exception of the PMG Green and the starting 5, but and the Credentials Now. But, these are all cards that are accessible, right? Like, these are cards that you will see, that they're not just total ghosts. That and so there's almost this idea that thinking about the one of ones, it's kind of a waste of time, just because it's fanciful. It's pipe dreaming, sort of. But I still want to challenge that because I was coming at that time. I was years deep in ultra modern collecting, and I want to challenge that because in ultra modern collecting, the whole paradigm is or the hierarchy of that collecting. Like I'll take Christian McCaffrey collecting as an example. That's oriented around the apex cards being the one of ones. As far as I can tell, and in my collecting opinion, his best cards are cards like his National Treasures, Shield Autograph, Platinum one of one, his Prism Black Finite one of one, his Contender Super Bowl Ticket one of one. I mean, these are all one of ones, and like collecting McCaffrey, actually, I only collect one of ones, and so I came back to Jordan. I was like, why not? Why not approach it this way? Why? I mean, the thing that does get me excited in Michael Jordan collecting, having owned Michael Jordan cards and collected him on or off, actively or passively, for I guess that would be around 7 years. You know, at that point, it's like I do want to go beyond the visible cards. I want to go to the ghost cards. I want to think about those too. I want to dream about those a little bit. I'm also, I'm an ambitious collector, right? I want to set the highest possible goal, and even if I fall short of it, I do want to aim as high as I can. So to me, that's what I brought to the table in that episode. Was I said, why not the one of ones? And if we do start thinking about the one of ones, like how would we start thinking about it? And so in preparation for that show, I put together a spreadsheet that day, and I just went through and I identified as best I could all of the Michael Jordan one of ones from the first year of one of ones, which was 97, 98, and from the second year, which was 98, 99. And the list ended up having some errors. I've been working on this list a bit for the last since then. As soon as I made it sort of became interesting to me, and making that list was very fateful. So in that way, I sort of blame Brian for this entire rabbit hole of Michael Jordan one of one collecting that I've gone down, that I've ultimately found so compelling that I hope that I can make it my personal identity as a collector, that I am a Michael Jordan one of one collector. Like that became a real focus of mine. And I sort of just envision, and this is silly, but collecting cards is silly. But the thing that motivates me is just sort of thinking to myself, if I have, one of the ways I think about it is if I were set up at like the National, but not selling cards, just showing off, just having a cool display case to show off cards. What cards would I want to set out? Like, what would I want my display case to look like? Or if I'm just sitting here thumbing through my collection, which are the cards that I'm going to get the most intrigue out of stopping and pausing and looking at? And the answer to that is definitely one of ones. That and I sort of noticed over the last few years that I drifted away from enjoying looking at the Michael Jordan portion of my shoebox, because it just didn't quite capture me the way that one of one collecting of the sort of apex cards of my other PC players did. So I wanted to bring that to Michael Jordan collecting, because it's very far fetched, but just this idea of having Michael Jordan one of ones, it just makes for a very cohesive collection browsing experience. If I'm going from a Jokic one of one to a Le'Veon Bell one of one to a Patrick Mahomes one of one to a Michael Jordan one of one, I want that consistency. I want that uniformity of presentation. Like I said, that's a very silly thing, but it's also, it gets to the brass tacks of collector identity. It gets to the point of why I do anything, and that, or at least it gets to the point of how collecting is an expression of my creativity, of my identity, of my value system, and in a very unserious way, right? In a very playful way. But that's the magic, that's the allure, that's the compelling part about card collecting, is that it is something different. It is playful. It is a recess, an intellectual recess for serious adults who want to have something to do for fun on the side, and that it's a sort of game. It's entrepreneurial. It's a hobby, but there's also buying and selling and activity that goes on, and we're all sort of players in this game, and we're all main characters, sort of, to turn that meme on its head a little bit, where people are often accused on social media of having main character syndrome, but in this case, it's a good thing that everybody in the hobby, this is a way to be the main character in each of our stories, through this fun, relaxing, recreational thing of collecting cards. Even though the thing that actually makes it the most fun and recreational is that it's really not relaxing when we're doing it at its peak. That instead it's actually very stimulating and challenging, but in a way where the stakes are not, work and bosses and and stuff like that, but instead that we are the boss of it, or to borrow from Brett, a stacking slabsism, we the CEOs of our collection, or the general managers of our collection. That, so, but anyway, enough on that aside. But the development of this checklist and then refining it as a consequence of appearing on with Cajun, at that time it was just a fleeting interest. I wouldn't have even known where to begin to try and find some of those one of ones. For the most part, I knew where a few were, the most visible ones, but it was just a fleeting interest, mostly. But the logic was there. All the ingredients were there. Everything was lining up. But I'm slow. I develop slowly. I move at a relatively slow pace, and this was no exception. Now, the interesting thing about the Cajun hierarchy is that it sort of has as its antecedent this poster from Hoop Royalty. And this was a post from June 9th, 2011 that is well known among Jordan collectors. It used to get passed around a lot. I think it's been supplanted by the Cajun hierarchy, but you can see that it's sort of it has the seeds of what Brian took and formalized and developed further. It's just this idea of of a graphic that shows really cool Michael Jordan cards, and it becomes a checklist. That's how people would use it. Like, I remember many years ago in Michael Jordan group chats and stuff, we would share this, and then we'd say, how many of these do you have? And we would go through and we'd count, and well, I have 3 of them, or I have 12, and so this is the antecedent, right? And this has always sort of been part of the Michael Jordan collecting experience. And so, if this doesn't exist for one of ones, and that I think is a big part of the structural explanation for why they're out of sight and out of mind, in addition to the fact that they just seemed especially unattainable in the much more limited media atmosphere of the 90s, when many of us Michael Jordan collectors were coming of age and learning our habits and our traditions that would then carry on into adulthood. Was just that you would never see them. You would go to a card show, you wouldn't see them. Your local card shop didn't have them. The Beckett magazine wasn't talking about them for the most part. So this is speaking to the mechanism of how hierarchies and tradition and taste are formed, and the practicalities from which those things emerge. But nonetheless, like I said, I started gaining these respect for these Jordan one of ones. I kept on going back to the checklist. I kept thinking about it, but never really striking. Partially because my collecting interest was so distributed across multiple different players, and collecting cards of all these different players. But the inflection point, which I've discussed on a previous HOJ-Cast, I think it's 14. It's whatever it's called. The card that brought me back to Michael Jordan collecting. It was when the 1998-99 Upper Deck 230A Gold 1 of 1, when that Michael Jordan card became available. And even then, like I discussed in that episode, people sent it to me like 4 or 5 times. They're like, "You're a 1 of 1 guy. You're a Michael Jordan guy. Why aren't you collecting this card?" And then that eventually it clicked with me too. I had to be bashed over the head with my own logic, but eventually I maneuvered, I purchased it, and I just loved it. And it sent me down a Michael Jordan 1 of 1 rabbit hole that now has culminated. I think I have around 30 Michael Jordan 1 of 1s now, and the last 6 months of collecting activity has just been an absolute flurry. And it's been among the most that 6 month period is at least the most fun I've ever had in my entire collecting journey. Even going back to how much fun I was having at the very beginning, it was reminiscence of that. So that card gets me hooked on Michael Jordan collecting. Like I said, I've come up to about 30. And this is I've just quickly flipped to showing the spreadsheet on the screen, and sort of now I've developed this spreadsheet. Like I said, originally it was just the first 2 years. Now I've fleshed it out to go all the way through 2009-10, and it includes solo Michael Jordan cards, it includes multiplayer cards that feature Michael Jordan, and it includes printing plates, whether solo or multiplayer cards that have Michael Jordan on them. And all card types are included here. autograph patch only, memorabilia only, floor. I mean, every type of card. It's all, if it's a Michael Jordan card and it's a 1/1, it's here. So I intend to just continue building it out, but it takes time. I mean, like I last night I added the 2009-10 stuff and the 08-09 stuff. I actually added both those years last night. And it took like 2 hours. I mean, it's freaking, it's time consuming. But okay, so let's now start to get to the deal. So the deal was to really understand the deal, let me provide a visual. So immediately from the spreadsheet point of view, the first year of Michael Jordan 1/1s is very compelling because there are only 7, and you can see on the spreadsheet here what those 7 are. But probably a better way to represent it is this little graphic that I put on the screen. And I made this just for this episode. And honestly, at some point, I need to dig in and create some sort of visual representation of the 1/1 offerings from, I think, at least from the first 3 years, from 97-98, 98-99, and 99-2000. And those 3 years are interesting because 97, they all have at least a foot in the 90s. 97-98 has 7 Michael Jordan 1/1s, which are the ones on the screen. 98-99 has a little bit more than 9 times as many. 98-99 has 65 1/1s, which is still a modest number, I think. But it's a multiple of what the first year had. So the first 2 years have 72, and those are the only 2 years that are fully 90s. But then if you want to let the third year in too, to create a wider and a more accessible menu of 1/1s, then you bring in 1999-2000 as well. That has 234. And I've got 1/1s from each of those tiers or each of those seasons. But the reason why I made this graphic, the reason why I bring this up, is because I think and especially as time has gone on, I've found that this first year of Michael Jordan 1/1s is a, I value it very highly. So the first year of 1/1s has just 7, and here's how they break down. There are 4 from Flair Showcase, there are 2 from Ultra, and there is 1 from Upper Deck. And I eventually came to the belief that if there's a chance to get any of these, that pretty much everything and I would do everything in my power to get to it, to have one of these 7, because I think there's a real case to be made that these are 7 from my collecting. Really, not saying that the market sees it this way, not saying that any other collector does or should see it this way, but the culmination of all of my approaches all point towards these 7 being 7 of Michael Jordan's absolute most desirable cards for me. And so to belong to the group of these 7 is that really lines up with the collector identity, the way that I want to express what I value as a collector. So you have these 7. Now, here's what's difficult about it, among other things. So you have the 4 Flair Showcase Michael Jordans, row 0, row 1, row 2, and row 3. They're each card number 1. So depending upon your classification methodologies, maybe you see them as image variations of each other. Maybe you see it as 4 separate base sets. Maybe you see it as a tiered base set. Because maybe even though the card number is, or technically the seat number is 1, but then there's the row. So sort of, you have row 0, seat 1. Maybe you see that as being the first card in the checklist, or maybe you see it as being the last, similar to how field level is seen, although the number 0 is chronologically prior to 1, 2, and 3. But I know some checklist websites treat the row 3 as the quote-unquote true base. But in any way you approach it, you've sort of got these 4. Now, 1 for each of those 4 rows. Now, these are absolutely beautiful cards. These are beautiful versions, as base versions, as legacy collection, or as masterpieces. And those are the 3 forms that each of these cards take: is the base version, the legacy collection number to 100, or the masterpiece 1/1. And so Nat, who I don't I know doesn't need any introduction here. Nat Turner has 3 of these 4. He has the row 0, he has the row 1, and he has the row 2. The row 3, which has never been seen, so I'm just substituting in an image of the legacy for it, because the image is the card design is very similar. The main difference is that on the masterpieces the nameplate is purple, and on the legacies it's blue. So that's the key aesthetic difference, and that's all that's needed. I mean, just that minor difference is quite all right by me. But so Nat has row 0, 1, and 2, and row 3 hasn't surfaced to my knowledge. So those are going to be very tough. Those are, I mean, good luck prying those out of Nat's collection. I just don't see it happening. And then if row 3 ever shows up, the only way that I might have a shot at it is if I just somehow got to it first. And, you know, I don't know. I just don't really think I'd ever have a shot at it, because there's so many collectors who is from Nat on down who would very strongly vie for that card. Then you get to the 2 ultras, and so the ultras are interesting. You have the Series 1 base set, and then you have the Series 2, which is themed 98 greats, and is a subset. Like 98 greats, there's a handful of players who have 98 greats cards, and it's sort of it's a subset. They're all tied together by each having the 98 greats theme. So the base set one from Series 1, that card is chronologically the first Michael Jordan 1 of 1 to be released, according to my understanding of what the release calendar was for these products. That Ultra Series 1 is the first to be released. So that Ultra 1 of 1 there on the screen is Michael Jordan's first ever 1 of 1. That card showed up with Grant Waldorf Stories maybe last year or the year before, and he eventually placed it elsewhere. I don't know where it went. I don't know who has it, but that's a card that I think it has a claim to be Michael Jordan's best card ever, as his first 1 of 1. Of course, best. What does best mean? It's just best is almost it means something to me. It might mean something completely different to somebody else. So I the more accurate way to say it is it's Michael Jordan's first ever 1 of 1. And if you value that, then great. And if you don't, that's fine too. And then you have the Series 2 98 greats. That's never been seen. At least I'm not aware of it. So there's 2 of these 7 that haven't been seen: the row 3 and the 98 greats. And then you have the Upper Deck. And so the Upper Deck is this PowerDeck audio 1 of 1. It's a card. It's also a multimedia item. It also can be played in a CD player, but you have to remove the centerpiece and you have to put it into an adapter. That adapter goes into a CD-ROM, and then it has audio content. And nobody knows what audio content is on this card because it's never been played. It's still completely intact. And this circle piece is still there, so nobody knows what it says or what audio is on there. But there is audio content on this card. So this card is like a hybrid. It's a multimedia item and it's a trading card. It's a sports card, and it's in the same dimensions and size. It's 2.5 by 3.5. I have it sitting here. Fits perfectly into the slab. Has a really cool design, cool action shot. Has the 1 of 1 stamp, has the Upper Deck logo, has the PowerDeck audio logo as well, which is a concept that Upper Deck pioneered for these mixed use cards, these multimedia cards. And then the story behind this card is that first of all, it's the only insert 1 of 1 from this year, and so it's indisputably the first insert 1 of 1 of Michael Jordan, which holds some weight if from the point of view that Michael Jordan collecting is dominated by inserts. So it's indisputably the first insert 1 of 1, which is pretty neat. It's indisputably his first Upper Deck 1 of 1, which is pretty cool to belong to that lineage. And it has some sort of tie to these monster dual logo man autograph cards from Exquisite, which is made by Upper Deck, or Ultimate Collection, which is made by Upper Deck. It's sort of, it's the earlier, you sort of have the evolution, image where, you sort of see the the figure turn into a human in the various stages, and sort of it's first is hunched over and then eventually it's upright and walking like a human. And sort of this is the early version along that evolutionary chain of figures that this is the first one. This is the earliest iteration. There's certainly no logo man, there's no autograph, but this is among Upper Deck cards. This is the first one of one Michael Jordan card, but it's even more than that. It's the first basketball one of one Upper Deck ever made, and even more than that, it's just flat out the first one of one Upper Deck ever made, period. And you might say, well, what about baseball or football or something? And as far as my research indicates, or over hockey, that this was the only card associated with 1997 or 1997-98 seasons. This was the only one that Upper Deck made of any player in any sport to get a one of one. So this PowerDeck audio card, it has a black jersey, which is unnumbered, which is the most common. It fell 1 in 23 packs. There's a red jersey version, which has intermediate rarity, that fell 1 in 72 packs. And then there's the white jersey, which is the one of one. And it's just those 3 cards. It's just Michael Jordan. It's those 3 cards. That's it. There's no other players. So, that's the compelling story here behind this card, is that it's literally the first Upper Deck one of one. It belongs to these 7 Jordan first year one of ones and stuff. And so anyway, none of these cards is perfect, right? So like, if to pick on each of them a bit, the PowerDeck, it's a mixed use card. It's not traditional. It contains CD content. It's an unusual item. You have the Ultra, which are very beautiful cards, more traditional cards, obviously, but they are indistinguishable on their front side from the Platinum Medallion. The nameplate didn't change color, nothing changed. So in that way, it's a little bit of a letdown that those cards, if you had a Platinum Medallion out of 100 and a Masterpiece one of one of that card laying on the table, I wouldn't be able to tell you the difference. Nobody could. But the backside is certainly different. The backside has the beautiful one of one Masterpiece stamp, and that's all you need. That certainly distinguishes the card. It doesn't really change my point of view that that's probably Michael Jordan's best card. And then the Flair, the Flair Showcase are just gorgeous, but there's 4, right? There's 4 different ones, so there's a little bit of a dilution there, perhaps. Anyway, just because none of the cards is perfect, I would move mountains to acquire any of these if that was even a possibility, but I don't think it is. But so that's why when the opportunity came up to get a card from this group of 7, that I certainly took it. I certainly took it. And so now let's talk about sort of the deal and the motivation behind it. And get to the valuations and how we valued stuff. So I had been admiring this card for years, but slowly warming up to it. Even as much as a year ago, I don't think I would have made this trade. In fact, I'm sure I wouldn't have. But I finally was ready to do it. And I felt that the card was continuing to have a stronger and stronger hold on me as being one of those 7. And so eventually I just got to the point where, I said, I'm gonna make my Molten Metal Fusion Titanium available. And there were several suitors for this card, and some wanted to buy it outright, but I would always much prefer to trade it if I can get to a card that I like quite a bit also. So I did propose several trades to Stan, and he was just superb to work with. He's a gentleman. He's incredibly courteous. He's thoughtful. He's accessible. He's hilarious. He's just a great guy to work with. And so I sent over some proposals. I said, look, I mean, we sort of I had dangled this idea of sort of doing this trade very lightly, but I got a little more serious about it last week or so, and I start, I guess, I don't know if this was a week or 2 weeks ago, somewhere in that range. And I sort of said, look, like I'm a serious, like I'd like to do this. I'd like to get that PowerDeck 1 of 1. And I know that you need a really big card in return. So how about this Molten Fusion Titanium? And but we had to value stuff, and so let's get to the valuation side of this. Now the another thing I'll say about Stan is that he has one of the richest understandings of the Michael Jordan offering of anybody. And he's always going to be a very savvy operator or trade partner. And if ever I'm doing a trade with him, I have to really think carefully, because whatever he's going to be making a very intelligent and thoughtful and calculated move. And but he's fair. He's nothing wrong with that. But I just want to make sure, like, I got to be careful, because Stan, he has such encyclopedic knowledge of Michael Jordan cards. It goes beyond mine. I've got a pretty narrow and deep knowledge of the 1 of 1 offering, and I have a pretty nice grasp of his 90s offerings. But Stan is deeper. He's investigated these exclusive overseas releases that that these various cards that have sort of have these incredibly limited print runs, and stuff that I've never heard of until and unless he brings it up. So he has such a knowledge, and he's very well connected in the collecting community. And so when he's like taking it seriously, I'm like, oh crap, have I made a big mistake here? But eventually my conviction trumped whatever worries I had that I just might not be making a smart trade. That the conviction went out eventually. And so I dangled this card. He was interested, and we started putting together a trade package. And so this is what we settled on. And I initially asked for quite a bit more, but we went back and forth a bit, and I eventually gave in. And so the trade value, and remember to keep this in mind with trade values. I mean, the trade values are just our guesses, there's posturing going on. And if I think my card is worth this, and then the other party might say, okay, well, that's fine, but if you think your card is worth that, then I'm going to value mine really strongly too. So for the purpose of this trade, I put the value on the Molten Fusion Titanium at $300,000. And from a comp point of view, is that justifiable? I think it is, but it's here. I'll lay out the evidence and you can decide. So the most recent sale was $180,000 for PSA 8, and that happened in May of 2024. So there hasn't been a copy to move publicly in 15 months, which is quite a while. And that one sold for $180,000 at Fanatics Premier. The card letter value today is $287,000. Now, card letter value is a universally applied algorithm to all cards that simply takes the sale in May of 2024, applies Michael Jordan's change in his index since then, and it spits out this value. So in other words, what this card has increased around 40% in value. Any Michael Jordan card that's sold on May 16th, 2024 will show the same increase, 35 to 40%. That's how the card letter value algorithm works. It just takes whatever that sale price was on that day. It says, what has Michael Jordan's total index done since, up or down, and by what percent, and it applies it. So here it would appear that Michael Jordan's index is probably up around 35 or 40% since then. The value is estimated under CL value at $287,000. Now this is key. There's only one bar here. There are 5 bars under every card letter value. The fact that only one is green and the other 4 are black means that this is our lowest value estimate. So if you hover over it, it says card letter value seeks to reflect the card's current market price. It is determined by anchoring the card's last sold price to the player's total market index. That's what I already got discussing. But this is the key. This particular CL value has a confidence level of 1 of 5. The more recent the last sold price, the higher the confidence level. So this has the lowest possible confidence level. So this is very rough, very tentative. But that was one starting point. This is a PSA 8. The one that I was suggesting was a BGS 8.5. Here's another sale, a BGS 9. This was a private sale that was publicly disclosed by Instagram account Wyverns0625. The card letter value for this BGS9 based on that sale from July of 2023 was $365,000. Again, the lowest possible confidence level. And then let's pull up one more. So there's a PSA 7 that sold in August of 2022, and that has a card letter value of $273,000. So look, roughly, for a BGS 8.5, it's probably not outrageous to suggest that on a good day it could get 300,000. Now that's probably generous to my side of the trade, but that's what I came up with. But and then to Stan's credit, he came back, and we valued the PowerDeck at 150, and then there were 6 other one of ones that came in. And I don't want to talk about or go into detail with those at this time, but we valued each of the 6 at 25,000, and those are very generous valuations, at least in some cases, because like one of the cards is a BGS 9.5 of the MJ Mystery Pack one of one from MJ Master Collection 1999-2000, and those, I mean, one of those recently sold for like, I don't know, like 10 maybe or something, or and they have recent sales like the 15 grand range, so that's a generous valuation. Most of these are like we had 2 of the MJ23 die cut one of ones. We valued those at 25,000 each. Those have recent sales in higher grades at right around 14 or 15 grand. So those were pretty generous valuations, but my valuation was generous too. And I think the way that I would really break it down is that, we gave a generous valuation to the other 6, but really the PowerDeck is where the bulk of the value is coming from. But this allowed us to sort of make sense of it all. Now, valuing the PowerDeck was very difficult, in no small part because of the significance of the card, but also there is a comp of it. There is a comp of the card out there. So something from the lore of this card. This card was a BGS 6, and Stan kept that BGS 6 label. But what's interesting about the BGS 6 of it all is that BGS mislabeled the card in several different ways. So they indicated it was the 1999-2000 Upper Deck PowerDeck, which would make it the 3rd year, and which would mean that it belongs to that 3rd season of one of ones, which has 234. And that identity is wildly different from if the card were 1997-98. And then they also identify the card as having number PD1, and that just simply isn't true. There's nothing on this card surface to suggest that it is card number PD1. It's NNO. It doesn't have a card number. So there were several serious misclassifications impacting this cert. And so this card came to auction with Golden in December of 2020. It was in the it was in the BGS 6 holder that says it's from 1999-2000, and then Beckett's title just simply called it 1998, which also is inaccurate. They also called it PD1, which is inaccurate. And the caption, just very casually gestures in the direct. I mean, they just gave it like 3 sentences, right? So it was a very subtle presentation, let's say, and one that missed several key classification features, because even this card being 98 versus being 97, and that's what it actually is. So PSA ended up properly encapsulating it as 1997 Upper Deck, to be more precise, at 1997-98, but PSA for its basketball classification just goes to the 1st year of the hyphenated season. So this is properly classified here with PSA as belonging to 1997-98 Upper Deck. That classification is huge, right? Because that classification is the difference between the card belonging to the group of 7 versus belonging to the group of 65, or as Beckett indicated, the group of 234. So there's quite a bit of noise, distorting the signal of what this card is. And Stanley was telling me that he was bidding on it, but he hit an account restriction. Remember, this is pre pandemic boom, for the most part, right? Like this sale came in December of 2020. This is, we had yet to see that 2021 bull run that you'll see if you look at indexes describing the general trend of cards. And so it's sold with Golden for $6,000. All right. And so the card letter value that is implied by that today is around 15 to 20. Obviously the lowest confidence interval. But it's sold for 6,000. And so, this made valuing it really tough because, 6,000 to 150,000. If we do that valuation level, if we do that, what is the multiple there? It's a 25x. So as Stanley and I were going back and forth, I was like, I'll go. And Stanley insisted he wanted to be a 150 on the card. He insisted on that, and I said, okay, but that's as high as I can go. That's a 25x. And now, I understand, and he explained to me the contingencies surrounding this deal, that it was mislabeled by Beckett and by Golden, and that, people didn't really know what it was, and he was bidding for it, and he couldn't win because he tapped out. His bid limit wasn't high enough at that time. And then he ended up finding the person who did win it, and he acquired it from them subsequently for more. I don't know for how much. But so that's sort of the background there behind this sale, and sort of how this sale really anchored the value of this card. But it's tricky, right? The card was misidentified. It was undersold. It was mislabeled by Golden too. So I had to look at that and say, okay, I do see some problems here. And also, I certainly do believe that Michael Jordan 1-of-1s have outpaced his general market. But so that's how we got to the valuation of this particular card. And so then we go back and we look at the trade picture here. And so that's how you get to there being 7. That's how you get there being 7 1-of-1s. So, that is how we ended up valuing it. And something cool that's sort of a relic from the Golden result is that Golden had an image of the card before Beckett graded it. And the card's in a one-touch here. And I just love the way that cards look in one-touch screw downs. I just think they look tremendous. The presentation is awesome. I also love the way that it looks in a PSA slab too. But yeah, they look awesome. And so, here's a picture of Stan and I in his office in Milwaukee. We don't live terribly far from each other. So Christina and I drove in to make the deal. He's got his 2 now copies there. And then there's a copy of me sitting in his in the chair in his dentist's office, which of course has a bit of it proves that the hobby gods have a sense of humor. That just because of all the playful ribbing that I've given dentists in the hobby as being very savvy, tough operators, and being overrepresented among the professions, and then lo and behold, to pry out this card, I had to make a deal with a dentist. So here's where I want to go next with this. Let me, as I'm about to go Broadway a little bit here, let me put a picture of the PowerDeck back on the screen. So let me talk about what I've already made sort of the case, I think, for why this card is cool. It boils down to it belonging to that group of 7. Now, I also think it has a lot of aesthetic properties that are great too. But this is certainly me putting a big emphasis on two key things. One, on rarity, on true rarity, and it doesn't get much rarer than the first ever Upper Deck 1-of-1. And then also putting an emphasis on the historic nature, that not only is the first Upper Deck 1-of-1 historic, but or rare, but it's also historic. That at least to me, that especially because of how that lineage of Upper Deck 1-of-1s developed over time and blossomed into these remarkable Logoman autograph cards and other, magnificent 1-of-1s under the Upper Deck umbrella. But it all started here with this card. So, but yet, like I say, I find it to be a cool action shot too. I haven't perfectly photo matched it yet, but I do believe I know what game it came from. I found a Getty image, but it shows the play from a different angle, so it's hard to 100% be sure that that's the play. But I've identified that I'm pretty sure this is Patrick Ewing right here in a New York Knicks jersey. And but I don't have a perfect match, so I'm not going to waste a lot of time trying to show that. I'm not 100% certain, but I'm pretty sure. I would love to be able to find that exact image, and then I could settle it. But I'm pretty sure it comes from a 1996 game against the Knicks. Anyway, so let me now pivot into making some comments about this broader project and about what it says about my collecting approach, and how I think about Michael Jordan cards, and I think there's a lot of good fodder here. So I want to take a number of angles here, and the thing that's just so cool, because if you've been following along with the HOJ-Cast, I've been developing, and you can, I mean, I don't think it's a very difficult connection to see that I've been developing this idea of sort of how do cards gain prominence. And I've been thinking about that question in large part because Michael Jordan one-of-ones are not prominent, and it perplexes me. And I think that the reasons why they're not prominent are more historical contingencies than necessary conditions. So I think that, or in other words, I think that it's more of an accident. It's more of an accident of history than destiny. That Michael Jordan one-of-ones have largely been out of sight and out of mind. And I sort of touched on that earlier in the episode, just that sort of, that we came of age during the 90s when and there were just so few of them, and that and then we had these iterations of these checklists, like from Hoop Royalty and the Cajun hierarchy, that continue to reify and replicate and further enforce the market results and the market hierarchy that's emerged over many years. And so, I'm challenging that orthodoxy with this move, and I had to, or in other words, if I were an audience member, I wouldn't take me seriously until I saw that I took myself seriously. And the way that I showed that was by making this trade, or at least that's one of the ways that I've showed it. And so you can look at this trade, and you can say, that this is me demonstrating that I think that this card is, at least from where I've evolved to, or from what I've developed to, that I would rather have this than the Molten Metal Fusion Titanium. And of course, we did add 6 other one-of-ones to the deal to get the value to a place that we were both comfortable with. But this was the haul to me. Like this, it was all about this card. So, this trade, I think, shows that. And then something really cool happened, sort of, that has really put to the test a lot of the stuff that I like I said, that I've been talking about on the HOJ-Cast recently, this idea of how does a card gain prominence? How does a card come to the stage? And sort of, how does a card get permission to be discussed among other cards? And then along came Adam Gray, the Real 27 guy. And I was just chatting with him, and I said, hey, you might think this is pretty cool. I picked up this card pretty recently, and we went back and forth. He was telling me some of his recent pickups, which were incredible. And we were sharing, comparing notes basically on collecting, because we don't really step on each other's collecting toes. Like he's so high in Kobe collecting. He's got some amazing Kobe cards, and I'm over here doing this sort of Michael Jordan, Jokic thing, Luka, Levian, etc. And so we're adjacent, but we're not overlapping. And so it's really cool to compare notes. And but I was sort of filling him in on what happened, and he sort of started digging into this card, and he said, you know what, it might be kind of neat if I made a reel that told the story of this trade. He's like, I think Stan has plenty of reason to be very proud of how this trade worked out from his end, but I can also see how your end is really intriguing too, and I think this could make a pretty cool piece of content. And so I said, yeah, but let's see if Stan is okay with it too. And Stan said, yeah, this could be cool. So we made Adam did all the work. He made the reel, and then that got released earlier today, and it's gotten a lot of engagement, and it fits this sort of idea that I've been saying about what happens when a card gets permission to enter the stage, and this is what it takes for a card to get permission to enter the stage. Somebody has to really, in order for the audience to take it seriously, or if I were in the audience, in order for me to take it seriously, in order for me to actually entertain the idea that I should be comparing an Upper Deck PowerDeck 1 of 1 of Michael Jordan, even with how great this card sounds on paper, to compare it to something as iconic, as desired, as valuable as a Molten Metal Fusion Titanium out of 40, to make that comparison, somebody has to actually, put their money where their mouth is. Somebody has to actually come out and say, yeah, I made this trade. I did this. I stepped out on, I went out on a limb here, and I tried it. And I demonstrated here that I'm willing to part with one of my favorite and most beautiful cards in order to be able to take this one back. And so once I did that, and then once Adam made the reel, just the flurry of responses and stuff has been fascinating, and to hear lots of different opinions and points of view from people has been really cool. And I want to, I was going to save this for a later segment, but I might as well. I have the momentum built up, and I'm talking about it now. So, sort of a review of the comments and the votes has been really instructive. So the last time I checked, Adam asked people who won the trade, and by the way, that's completely fine. Like that the whole point of him making this piece of content from his point of view is that it can be entertaining, that it can get some engagement, that it can show off his storytelling abilities. And I thought that he did an amazing job telling this story, both from Stan's side and from my side. And so but part of that is getting engagement, putting it to a vote. And so the last time I looked, the results of the vote on his poll, and I don't know what the N is, I don't know the number of participants, but it was 58% saying that Stan won and 42% saying that I won, which is actually higher than I thought I would get. And then and that's a binary too. So there wasn't like a third option that says like neither or tie or something. So there always could be some people who just click my name just to see the result or whatever. I mean, lots of caveats attached here, but so let me start with that. Let me just break that down briefly. So the only reason this trade was possible is because of that. Is because in truth, Stan won this trade, from at least from a value point of view. So that's what made this trade possible, right? Is that it had to be that way. It had to be in his favor in order for him to give up the first Upper Deck 1-1. He needs to win that. And I know, and I won't reveal anything of his collecting plans, except just to say that he has a very clear roadmap and plan for the next moves that he would like to make with that card. Like he has a very clear vision for his collection. He didn't just do this for fun. Like we're all doing it for fun, but he did it with very deliberately and intentionally. So he's playing chess over there with his collection, and so I'm so the only way that's the point though, is that I believe that the only way this trade could have possibly happened is if in general the public sentiment would say that he won the trade, because he's a very savvy operator. He's very intelligent. He's very in tune with the market, and so I'm surprised that it's that close, that it's only 58-42. It wouldn't have shocked me if it was 90-10. But it's a bit closer than that. So that's the poll result of it. And again, that result might be 90-10 by tomorrow. Who knows? There's that aspect of it, and then the other aspect of it is me reviewing the comments, and there have been lots of comments, and you should go look at them too. Go look at the poll. The poll will only live for 24 hours, and now it will only live for like 12 or something. But you can go look at the comments. Those should live forever. You can see them on my Instagram page or on Adam's, because he invited Stan and I to be collaborators on Instagram. And you can look at all the different comments, and you can see lots of different people giving lots of different points of view. And it's been really, really cool. It's a bit humbling, or really it's flattering to see that people would even care enough to throw their 2 cents in and take something away from this trade, and care enough about it to say things. And some of the feedback that has come in, for example, there's been some really passionate, very strong defenses of higher print run 90s cards relative to this one. So there's been some really passionate defenses of cards numbered to 40 or 50 or 100 to say that it's in the gist of those the gist of those points of view has essentially been, look, like either this that the market has developed over many years to prioritize this molten metal fusion out of 40, and it's aesthetically beautiful, and it's and that there's more than just rarity and historical significance, that the beauty of the card matters, and that the demand, the widespread demand for the card matters, and the history and the market speaking matters, which are all great points, obviously, which are very good points. And so that, the thing that let me say one more thing before I get to that point. So the other thing I'll mention is that and then there were plenty of people too expressing the point of view that they might prefer to have the PowerDeck in this trade. They might prefer to have the white jersey 1/1. And so what mostly was coming from that side was just a simple mentality, a really pretty much direct mentality that went something like this. Either a 1/1 is a 1/1, and especially with the historical component added to the rarity and sort of the cool artifact nature of this, that this is the first ever multimedia CD card. There are multimedia cards of other types of multimedia for going back many years, but this is the first multimedia CD card. And this is, or at least I'm pretty sure it is, or at least Upper Deck marketed as such. And then also that, but that might not be 100% correct. So let me hedge there. But more importantly, aside from whether it's the first CD-ROM card or not, more importantly, that's Upper Deck's first 1/1. That it's a Jordan 1/1 from the first year of Jordan 1/1s of a group of just 7. So sort of people noticing that. Other people just saying 7 1/1s versus 1 out of 40. So again, taking the rarity angle. So there's been some combination of the rarity and the history angle, and then the other angle was the third angle that I noticed was the practical angle, which is that, sure, the molten metal fusion titanium is expensive, very, very, very expensive, but there are 39 others, or well, Stan has 2, so there's 38 others, but there's 40 in total, and that you could go buy it back. If you really, really wanted to get that card back, you could get it back. But there's only ever going to be one chance to get the PowerDeck 1/1. And so the practical nature of being able to get this 1/1 trumps the availability that a card that has 40 copies might have, even if those copies are very, very expensive. So those were sort of the competing frameworks, the competing points of view. And then I was so interested to see the different people weighing in on this and giving their different points of view. And I would go look at their pages, and I would see what they like. And, a lot of times the people who would speak on behalf in favor of the 1/1 would say, their page would have a lot of 1/1s or more obscure rare cards. And then a lot of the people who were in favor of the molten metal fusion titanium, they either were big 90s collectors of any sport, or they were big Michael Jordan collectors. And when I would look at their pages, their pages would be filled with hierarchy type of cards. And so a different way of summarizing that is to say that 90s collectors and Michael Jordan collectors were not always, but were tending to favor the molten metal fusion side of the trade, and non-90s, non-Michael Jordan collectors were tending to favor the 1/1 side of the trade. And that, I think, that's probably the realistic best case outcome from my approach to this whole project, is that, yeah, the entrenched Michael Jordan collectors and 90s collectors who have spent years or decades building collections around the market hierarchy that's already established are not going to suddenly change their minds. They're not going to suddenly say, oh, well, here's this card I've never heard of before. This, even though it checks a lot of boxes and it sounds great on paper, I'm not just going to suddenly give up how important I believe the molten metal fusion titanium is. But then you can see on the other hand, and this was sort of the where I thought there is a bit of an edge or an imbalance that a collector can identify, is that the people who aren't entrenched in that field kind of come and take a look and say, maybe I like the 1 of 1. And again, it's not all, right? There are certainly, I'm sure there are non-Michael Jordan, non-1 of 1 collectors who still came, or non-Michael Jordan, non-90s collectors who still came in and said that they like the Molten Metal Fusion Titanium better. So it's not like this perfect split or anything, but there's a tendency. There was a tendency for 90s MJ guys to favor the Molten Metal Fusion Titanium, and for the others to favor the PowerDeck Upper Deck 1 of 1. And like I said, that's sort of the best case scenario, as I'm sort of challenging the orthodoxy here, is that, well, people who are a little less deeply ingrained into 90s and Michael Jordan collecting are actually tending to sort of see it the way that I was tending to see it too. And that makes sense, because I came back to Michael Jordan collecting. I'd spent half a decade mostly outside of Michael Jordan collecting, and then coming back. So of course I'm sort of seeing it through non-90s, non-Michael Jordan eyes, just like the commenters were. And then and I should mention, so there was actually a third comment type that was pretty common as well, which was just, if they're both happy, then they both did fine, right? And what more is there to say? I mean, that hopefully is the outcome of every trade, is that both sides walk away happy. And then the reality also is that I saw somebody make the observation that both sides should bleed. If both sides bleed a little bit, if both sides suffer or have a little bit of pain, that also probably is the sign of a good trade. So there was that point of view expressed too, that sort of, hey, each person got what they wanted. Each person feels like they came away better from the trade. So it's just nobody won the trade, or they both won. It was a success. It was merely a successful trade. So here's some big picture analysis now. So first of all, there's the Hegelian dialectic, which is something I brought up a few times over recent episodes. And the idea is really simple. It goes like this: an idea is put forth, and in this case, the idea that I've put forth is that Michael Jordan 1 of 1s are cards that I see as at least being on the same footing, not displacing cards like the Molten Metal Fusion Titanium or the PMG Champ or anything like that, not credentials, not displacing it, but just that maybe they should have a seat at that same table. That's sort of my hypothesis that I quite literally acted on by making this trade. And then so that's the idea that I've put out. Then there's 3 parts of the Hegelian dialectic. The second part is that the opposite idea replies. That once I put my idea out, now a second idea comes forth that contradicts it, and that says no. In fact, the PowerDeck 1 of 1, it's not on the same. It isn't quite at the same table here. That no, we don't even, you can make this trade and that's fine, but we believe that the Molten Metal Fusion Titanium wins this trade. That on balance, we're looking at the market history, market trends. We're looking at aesthetics and preference and iconicity and popularity, and we're going to say that those things you haven't disrupted that. Sure, you're bringing to the table the importance of rarity and firsts and historical nature, and that's fine, but it isn't. We're not going to give in to that. We're on the opposite side of this. And so the idea was put forth, and then its contradiction replied, and then they clash. And then the third and final part of the Hegelian dialectic is called synthesis. So part 1 is the thesis, part 2 is the antithesis. They clash, and then they synthesize. And so what does a synthesis look like? And so a synthesis might look like, we'll see how that shakes out. Maybe the synthesis is mostly just a preservation of the status quo, or maybe this card just will always be obscure and just not be of interest to people. Like I mentioned earlier, even a year ago, I would have defended the Molten Metal Fusion Titanium side of this trade. It's a very recent revelation to me that I would prefer this card to that. And so and let's also bear in mind too, I've just so that we're clear, I took back more than just this card also. So there's a value component too, that even by the valuation of this trade, that we added other cards to make the values equal out. So there's there's a chance that nothing has moved here. But that's really the Hegelian dialectic, though. The idea behind it is that ultimately there's a synthesis, that there's a meeting, a middle ground that we land on. And so I think maybe that middle ground is, potentially, that when people evaluate where one of one stand in the Michael Jordan catalog, that maybe they do have a seat at the table, along with to pull back up the Cajun hierarchy for a second, or to look at the hoop royalty, that maybe they do, maybe they could be included on an infographic like this, or maybe they do have a seat among the tier 1 cards. That's my belief, and it's more than my belief. I've acted on it. I've made a trade that literally says that I do think it's a tier 1 card. So that is that. So where maybe the synthesis lands at, yeah, we're not displacing the rubies or the PMGs or the molten metal fusion titaniums. We're not downgrading those at all. But maybe there ends up being a seat at the table for a card like this one. That is a possible third stage to the Hegelian dialectic. Here's another theory. So Edmund Burke is an anti-Enlightenment thinker, and the importance of sort of his thought, of the philosophical framework that he brought to the table, was he advocated for conservatism. So he was responding to the French Revolution, which he was witnessing happen in the late 18th century. And he was so disturbed by the beheadings and the unrest and the upending of so much tradition, and a lot of that was sort of happening being led by the light of the Enlightenment, and he pivoted against it. And he came out and he said, the institutions that have developed, the cultural norms that have developed, these things are not arbitrary. Or maybe they are, but we better make sure before we disrupt them that they're not serving purposes that we might not be totally aware of. And that before we do anything revolutionary, before we tear down all of our institutions and our traditions, let's make sure that that disruption is actually going to produce a greater good. And that in fact, generally there is a lot of wisdom embedded in cultural traditions and norms and institutions. And so to compare what Burke was saying to this situation here, Burke would sort of be against me, or at least he would have the presumption of being against me. And he would say, look, the market has developed as it has over years and years. These preferences have developed and they've been reinforced over time. There's wisdom in this market. There have been many people to come and go in this collecting space who have, including yourself, who have participated in and reinforced the hierarchy and the market. And so just be careful that by disrupting it, or by introducing this new concept that is rather novel, that it's not actually tearing down or interfering with institutions that are actually serving a greater purpose, a purpose of stability, a predictability, comfort, and so forth. So Burke would sort of push back against me, and he would say, but I think the allowance that he would give me would be this. He would say, if you truly have identified something that was overlooked by collectors, that was overlooked as a result of an accident of history, of just because of limited technology and very much and high levels of obscurity, if that's the real reason why it got overlooked, then these cards getting a seat at the table, not disrupting anything, but being able to bring something like the first Upper Deck 1 of 1 Jordan to the table, that it can probably have a seat there too. But it's not displacing anything, it's not replacing anything, it's not removing anything, but it's being allowed to have a chair, to have a seat at the table. That's probably the most I could expect from a Burkean thinker. Then there's a Thomas Kuhn approach. He's famous for the idea that unfortunately many TED Talks sort of squeezed the excitement out of by just beating it repeatedly, by constantly using it. But this idea of a paradigm shift. Now, when Kuhn mentioned paradigm shift, he was talking about the philosophy of science, and in particular, he was wondering how different eras of science can actually come can assume prominence given how important every scientist sharing assumptions is as they build models and they build on top of each other. So, example, nobody is born and has to reinvent and relearn science. When you're born, you study all the different current, most accepted provisions of science, and you try to build on top of those. And so that's how science develops. And that's how lots of bodies of knowledge develop. But Kuhn noticed that, for example, the Copernican revolution, the idea that the solar system it's a solar system, that planets orbit the sun rather than everything orbiting the Earth. That's a paradigm shift where all of science has to reacclimate itself to the idea that everything isn't orbiting the Earth, that the Earth is orbiting the sun. And people were, severely punished for going against the orthodoxy. But Kuhn was interested in, well, how does that change actually happen? And so his theory was that what happens is that you have this prevailing scientific model, but anomalies build up. And as anomalies accumulate, they put pressure on the model. And then eventually the model gets displaced by a new model that can better explain the anomalies. And so to transpose that onto this situation, the idea would be that these one-of-ones are anomalies, that we have this great method of looking at the Michael Jordan market and understanding the hierarchy, but the prevailing market tiering, the prevailing collector sentiment, it can't explain for these one-of-ones. Like, these cards are extremely rare, and they have great historical sentiments. And maybe it's not as beautiful as the Molten Metal Fusion, and it's not, but it looks pretty cool, and it has a historical artifact nature to it. And it belongs to, and it's the first ever one-of-one from a very important hobby brand. So there's lots these are all anomalies. Like why does nobody know about this card? Why is this card just now coming on people's radars? And so Kuhn would sort of suggest that, if a new paradigm comes along if a new model comes along that can better account for these one-of-ones while still accounting for everything else too, or in other words, just if a model comes along that gives the one-of-ones a seat at the table, and then we don't, and so you stop wasting the energy fighting against them, and then move forward with a new model that can explain them and can make room for them, that model's probably going to win. So there's a Kuhnian paradigm shift element here that I think might be fairly powerful. A fourth theoretical framework here that has been discussed previously on the HOJ-Cast is the omniscient collector experiment, which is just a variation of Rawls's veil of ignorance or original position thought experiment, which is just the idea that if we all as collectors removed every card from our collection, we start from scratch, and we ignore hype and we ignore market trends, and we just start over. We really start over from behind a veil of ignorance. We know nothing about our personal biases. We know nothing about what we own. We might be collectors of Pete Crow Armstrong, or we might be collectors of Dale Earnhardt, or we might be collectors of Garbage Pail Kids cards, or we might be Michael Jordan collectors. We know nothing about ourselves. We know nothing about what cards we own. If we take all that away and we just sort of and we had perfect knowledge of all of the cards that exist, all the athletes that exist, of how pop culture receives things and how popular athletes are. So we have perfect knowledge and we're totally blind to any potential biases that we might have. If that was the case, how would we rank cards? And so that omniscient collector experiment, and then I also added some more Rawlsian punch to it. That's another model that can be used to evaluate this situation. And I don't, it's obvious the way that I feel, but collectors are welcome to think about it however they'd like. So, all right. So I think I've pretty much wrapped up everything I want to say here, and we're at just over an hour and a half. So, this has been a trade that I'm very excited about, and it's been pretty fun to share some of the details and the insights from it. This has been the HOJ-Cast episode 20. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you guys on the next one.